lecturer and professor of practice here at CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies, and it is a pleasure to see you all here tonight, students, guests, presenters, everyone. This conference is sponsored both by our school and with the Cornell Worker Institute, who sponsored the reception, so we hope you enjoyed the appetizers and the wine. It's great to see and feel the energy. Can I have a show of hands? Yeah, give yourself a round of applause. Can I have a show of hands? Who has arrived only for the event tonight? Okay, around a third of you, most of you students at SLU. Great, so it means most of the audience have been with us since earlier today, perhaps since 10 a.m. So thank you for your fortitude and sticking with us all day today. I will offer some opening remarks and introduce the speakers. And after the speakers share their perspective, we will turn to Q&A. There will be written questions, and there are forms being distributed, and you can submit those at any time. And because I am not a very good multitasker, I will not be reading the questions while also trying to listen to our guests. So I've asked those who are collecting the questions to put them in some sort of priority order. We won't be able to get to everyone, but we will do our best. Today, 75% of the world's populations live under an authoritarian regime. 75% of the world's population live under an authoritarian regime. The heyday of democracy peaked in 2000. We're in a different time. Military coups were once the pathway to authoritarian power. More recently, though, we have the phenomena of elected authoritarians, who then proceed, once elected, to use the tools of governance to further constrain democracy and to ushering enduring one-party rule. And they do so by preserving elections, but the elections themselves become theater. And they're no longer genuine reflections of the choices of the electorate. We all know that our democracies, wherever we are very, very far from perfect. The quality and nature of the democracy here in the US is one that changes over time. Authoritarianism is not a stranger to our shores here in the US of A. The US was born as a Herrenvolk democracy. Herrenvolk is the German word for master race. And for most of our history, our political system reserved democracy rights and privileges exclusively to a dominant ethnic or racial group, wealthy white men, while other groups were systematically excluded and oppressed. The system was not confined to the South. The North has its own version, where the wealthy and later immigrant and ethnic political machines also governed in an exclusionary and hierarchical way, where the few dominated the many. South Korea has also had a rocky road to democracy, with US colonialism and military leaders dominating from the 1940s to 1988, with only quick action saving it from a recent coup attempt. India also has a similar journey from monarchies, colonialism, to democracy. The inclusive, diverse, yet flawed democracy that we have today in the US of A represents hundreds of years of struggle, struggles that made America better, always imperfect, but better. The disorientation of Trump's first 100 days portend a new era, not just for this country, quite possibly for the world. It beckons us, though, forward. It beckons us to a new era of organizing. Indeed, we are called to be MABA. to be the ones who make America better again. Yay, if we can have Maha, why can't we have Maba? So we've got to do what we do best, which is to advance justice and equity, to make a revolution that really allows us to live our values, so they're not just empty rhetoric. We invited 3 working class strategists, activists, and leaders to share their perspectives on this moment and to be in dialogue with us this evening. We hope they will share not only challenges, but also effective strategies and approaches. Robin D.G. Kelly is professor at the University of California, Los Angeles. Unfortunately, some shifts in family obligations meant that Robin could not be with us in person tonight, but he did send a recording of his remarks, which we will play later. His books include Hammer and Hoe, Alabama Communists During the Great Repression, several other books, and many, many, many articles. He does send his regrets. We're also joined by Sung-hee Oh, Director of International Affairs of the Korean Public Service and Transportation Workers Union. Sung-hee has been involved in the South Korean trade union movement for over 19 years. She has been the Director of International Affairs. She's been the Director of International Affairs since August 2020, having previously worked at the Korean Government Employees Union and the GM Korea branch of the Korean Metal Workers Union. Her areas of expertise and interest include strengthening universal quality public services, labor rights, women's rights, and past human rights violations through state violence. Badavi Desai is the executive director and a co-founder of the 28,000 member-strong New York Taxi Workers Alliance, the union of the city's taxi, green cab, and Uber and Lyft drivers. She has been organizing taxi drivers since 1996. NYTWA's campaigns have won back over $450 million in stolen wages from Uber, Lyft, and Yellow Cab drivers, and over $475 million in debt forgiveness for Yellow Cab medallion owner drivers. That's almost $1 billion for working people. On January 28, 2017, New York Taxi Workers Alliance was the first union to take collective action against a Trump policy, striking at JFK Airport in protest of the White House's hateful Muslim ban. He's done so many more hateful things in the 100 days. And in 2011, New York and Philadelphia TWA formed the National Taxi Workers Alliance, the 57th affiliate of the AFL-CIO, and its first one of independent contractors, making history wherever she goes. Badavi Desai. She was previously served on the AFL-CIO Executive Council. So what I'd like to do is to start with a question to both of you, and then we'll go to Robin's recording and to your extended remarks. So please share with us, how did you become a champion of workers and the working class? What's your journey to being a unionist?
So, okay. I was very active in university student movement in the 1990s, and my mother really didn't like it because she thought that that would be very harmful to my career after graduation from the college. So she decided to send me to Seattle in 2000. And then, anti-WTO struggle and everything. So I stayed there, and then I started joining design school there. So I lived in Seattle until 2006, and then I went back to South Korea and I started working in design company as just regular workers. But then I felt like something was missing in my life, so I decided to go back to join the trade union movement in 2006, and that's how I began working for the trade union, and yeah, that's it.
Good evening, everybody. Well, I grew up poor, and so it didn't feel like a choice. My mom was a factory worker, and my dad, we came into, I was born in India, but we came to the States in 1979, and I was about like 6.5 years old at the time. And I grew up in New Jersey, and I grew up in a really small town called Harrison, which is like very working class, and it was what they used to call like a company town. And so everybody pretty much worked in one of the factories. And so it was one of those places where everybody had either 2 jobs or no jobs, And so when my mom would work, I really saw the difference when she was in a union shop, and she always worked like the night shift, so from from 4 p.m. to midnight, and I just remember that. I just remember like my dad would feel a certain anxiety because she was on a factory, she's a factory worker and on the assembly line. And there'd just be an anxiety of like, is she gonna come home with an injury? And when she worked in a factory, in a union factory, the security was that like my brothers and my dad and I would feel like, well, someone's gonna be there to help her. And it really just kind of stayed with me. And at one point, my mom, she was a Teamster. And just 2 things. I like when we would get the newsletters at home, it was like family reading. It felt like a letter from India. Like everybody would read it, Especially because my mom worked the night shift, so like we didn't really get to see her often. But the other thing that really resonated with me was, she worked in one particular shop where my mom was such an angel, and she was just so sweet, and everybody just really loved her, and she was so brave and really strong, and everybody wanted her to like be the head of that local union, but there was no opportunity for a woman of color, an immigrant woman of color, inside that union, and it really stayed with me, and so I wanted to. I wanted to fight for my people, and for me that meant poor people. And I wanted to be part of a workers' movement because I think there's no greater force in society than organized workers, and I hate poverty as much as I hate war. And I felt that only an organized working class could overcome both of those things. But I also didn't want to be part of the traditional labor movement because of all the racism and sexism and classism, to be honest with you, that only some workers were deemed organizable. And it was like, the more you're exploited and the more poor you are, you're not deemed as people that can be organized, which just to me is so, it's such a betrayal of the working class, what I think really it means to be a unionist. And so that's why I chose a route to not go into the traditional union movement. And I've been really fortunate because a group of us co-founded I started organizing in '96, and then a group of us co-founded the Taxi Workers Alliance in 1998, and they can't get rid of me. I'm still there. But that's my journey.
Thank you both for being here. We asked our guests to take around 15 to 20 minutes or so and share with us how they understand this historical moment that we're in and what it means for labor. So I'd like us to start by listening to Robin Kelly's remarks, and then we'll move to our guests who are here. So. Okay, try again. Okay. Help is on the way. Works well in rehearsal. And then or you want to? So while they are solving the IT problem, we'll just take a quick poll to find out if Make America Better Again has a future. So how many of you are for Make America Better Again? Yeah, a few. How many is like, let's retire the term now, it should never leave this building? Oh. It's the sound. Yeah, I was instructed to hit play. Just hit that.
Let's see where the audio is going to, though.
They used to have the button that said America out of everywhere. Terrific. Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everyone. We have figured out a plan B. So our plan B is we'll proceed with Sung-hee and Bedavi, and then we will close with Robin's remarks if the sound system cooperates. If not, we'll make it available online at a later date. Okay? Great. Thank you so much. We're going to continue. Yeah. Thanks. Are you going to share? Sure. I can. Okay.
Hello, comrades, allies, and fellow workers. I bring you warm greetings on behalf of the 250,000 members of the Korean Public Service and Transport Workers Union, KPTU. I'm honored to speak here tonight, which gives me the opportunity to stand in solidarity with you, comrades. So for those who may not know us, the KPT was founded in 1989 by public sector workers from national hospitals and public institutions. Today, we are the largest industrial union within the Korean Confederation of Trade Unions, KCTU, representing public and social services and transport workers throughout South Korea. And let me begin by thanking all of you who stood with Korean workers and citizens in our recent struggle to defend democracy in South Korea. Your solidarity mattered. After former President Yoon Suk-yeol declared martial law on December 3rd, 2024, it was the pressure of the mass protest and international support that helped lead to his impeachment by the Constitutional Court in April. Even after the Constitutional Court ruling, there are still deep wounds in South Korea. But I believe we are now on the road to restoring democracy in South Korea. So according to the Swedish Freedom Institute's 2025 Democracy Report, the number of authoritarian regimes now exceeds the number of the democracies for the first time in more than 2 decades. As Alicia said in her opening remarks, nearly 3/4 of the world's population lives under authoritarian rule. This is the highest level since 1978. In Europe, the far-right parties are gaining strength, from Germany's AfD to nationalist coalitions in Italy and the European Union Parliament. This suggests that far-right parties are becoming more visible in political discourse and normalized in Europe. These forces are not only xenophobic and anti-immigrant, they are increasingly appealing to disillusioned working-class voters, including trade union members. Authoritarianism and the far-right feed on inequality. Economic crisis and neoliberal austerity create fear, insecurity, and frustration, fertile ground for the politics of division and hate, and for the wealth and power of the far right and the oligarchy. South Korea barely survived Yoon Suk-yeol's coup, which Yoon blamed on election fraud and political interference by pro-communist organizations, including the main opposition Democratic Party and the KCTU. Despite former President Yoon's failed coup attempt and the Constitutional Court's decision to impeach Yoon, the months of unrest caused by Yoon's coup exposed the fragility of our democratic institutions. Even with Yoon's impeachment, his allies continue to influence the political landscape, and the people of South Korea now face unprecedented challenges. In addition, Yoon's former prime minister, widely seen, So the Conservative People Power Party has embraced far-right rhetoric, blaming labor unions, immigrants, especially Chinese and Southeast Asians, and North Korea for society's ill, especially since the December 3rd coup crisis, when conservative Christian groups and far-right forces factions led rallies in defense of Yoon's coup. In addition, Yoon's former prime minister, widely seen as complicit in the coup, announced last week that he would run for president as a unified candidate on behalf of the People Power Party. Meanwhile, the Supreme Court overturned the acquittal of a leading opposition candidate and sent his case back to a lower court for a retrial on charges of violating the electoral law in South Korea, creating a controversy that will continue because his lower court will be set after the presidential election, even if he is elected president, because of the interpretation of presidential immunity from prosecution. While both major parties and their candidates focus their energy on political vendettas and criticism of each other, political debate on the social agenda to promote equality and diversity in the upcoming June 3rd presidential election has disappeared. It is very painful that progressive political forces in South Korea are more divided and weakened than ever at such a critical time when the two dominant parties, the Democratic Party and the People Power Party, have both shifted to the right to gain more votes from independent voters. We are particularly concerned about the rightward shift of the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party, which has called itself progressive, has positioned itself as a centrist conservative, arguing that the People Power Party abandoned conservative values by embracing far-right forces, so the Democratic Party must now take responsibility for those values. In fact, before its recent positioning as a centrist conservative, the Democratic Party has adopted policies that directly harm workers and the vulnerable, tax cuts for the wealthy and big corporations, the regulation of work hours in the semiconductor industry, forcing workers to work more than 52 hours a week, and backroom national pension reforms that sharply increase pension contributions and reduce benefits, and silence on anti-discrimination laws to protect the rights of LGBTQ+ and people with disabilities, which have long been demanded by unions and social movement groups, along with the recommendations of United Nations human rights institutions. In other words, instead of directly confronting the extreme rightward shift of the conservative People Power Party, the Democratic Party is focused solely on expanding its electoral base by moving further to the right. So over the past 5 months, the workers and citizens who fought together for the restoration of democracy and the impeachment of Yoon Suk-yeol demanded more than just a change of government. They demanded real social reform that would bring inclusiveness, diversity, and justice instead of hatred, discrimination, and inequality. But as the June 3rd presidential election approaches, we are seeing renewed pressure for strategic voting or critical support in South Korean parlance. Pro-Democratic Party, civil society groups, and opposition parties are forming an alliance to support the Democratic Party candidate, arguing that unity is needed to defeat the far right and the complexities of Yoon's rebellion, which remains unpunished. The Democratic Party also frames this upcoming presidential election as a confrontation between democratic and anti-democratic forces, almost forcing voters to unite around the center of the Democratic Party candidate in order to eliminate the rebellious forces, as if the inequality and injustice and other social problems that have become deeper and more widespread as a result of the neoliberal policies that the Democratic Party has painfully implemented for almost 3 decades will be addressed as long as they win the election. But this is nothing new. For more than 40 years, since the end of military dictatorship through the People's Uprising and the months-long Great Workers' Struggle in 1987, progressives in South Korea have been told to support the second worst option, always the Democratic Party, which has never been a real alternative for the working class. But history tells us that critical support for the Democratic Party has not led to real progressive change that benefits working class people. During its 10 consecutive years in power from 1998 to 2008, when union density was less than 10%, the IMF-backed neoliberal reforms embraced by the Democratic Party affected the lives of workers and the people. The privatization of the power sector, the introduction of laws that allow mass layoffs and dispatch labor, the evaluation system of public institutions that prioritize profitability rather than the quality of public services, the introduction of essential services to be maintained and back to work orders during strikes to critically limit the right to strike are among the retrogressive reforms of the Democratic Party government. In addition, the Democratic Party has helped block electoral reforms that would have allowed small and progressive parties to gain meaningful representation, refusing to reform the current single-member geographic district system in the name of preventing wasted votes, and to maintain the two-party status quo that benefits only the two major parties, They have created and abused a bizarre satellite party system to dominate proportional representation, which accounts for nearly 1/6 of the seats in the National Assembly. After Japanese rule and the Korean War, right-wing anti-communist dictators backed by the US military government crushed leftist movements and the Left Party, establishing the current two-party system in the 1950s and beyond. Independent democratic unions were banned, and the right's political monopoly continued. Despite harsh government repression and anti-union policies, the South Korean labor movement grew out of struggles against dictatorship, poverty, and exploitation in the 1970s and 1980s. The Great Workers' Struggle of 1987, in which more than half of unionized workplaces went on strike, marked a turning point. It led to the formation of the Korean Confederation of Trade Unions in 1995, an independent and militant force for workers' rights. However, despite the democratization achieved through a democratic electoral system with direct elections of the president and so on, the voices of the working class have not yet reached the political sphere. In response, after years of efforts by the KCTU and other progressive forces, the Democratic Labour Party, DLP, was formed in 2000, a bold step toward political representation for the working class. The DLP won 10 seats out of 300 seats in the National Assembly in the 2004 general election. But internal divisions and conflict due to a view toward the North Korea and internal dispute on hegemony led to its fragmentation in 2008. Since then, the DLP has split into 4 small progressive parties, and progressive forces have struggled to regain momentum. As a result of the fragmentation of the progressive political movement, the KCTU has failed to provide and engage in discussions or political education programs for union members and officials aimed at rebuilding its position in the political mobilization of the working class. Meanwhile, some unions have turned away from organizing struggles on the shop floor to legislate lobbying of politicians in the 2 major parties. Others, especially among younger union members unfamiliar with earlier militant traditions and democratic union values, have been influenced by meritocratic values or even supported right-wing politics out of frustration, focusing only on their own interests and benefits in the workplace. But this is not the way forward. It is true that the political movement of the working class is still facing difficulties. Despite these setbacks, something new is stirring. The struggle against the impeachment of Yoon Suk-yeol brought tens of thousands of people to the streets, many of them young people, mostly women in their 20s and 30s. Unlike the protest that led to impeachment of Park Geun-hye in 2016, youth participation was even stronger this time. This is likely due to rising inequality. The wage gap between the top 10% and the bottom 10% is 5.52 times based on monthly wages. In addition, the wage gap is exacerbated by precarious employment, which disproportionately affects young people, and wage discrimination against women is more severe among non-regular workers. Housing is unaffordable, and youth unemployment is at its highest level since COVID-19 at 8%. The people of the square and the new generation want more than the replacement of one political party with another. We have seen a real and new form of solidarity between different groups of trade unions, young feminist groups, peasant groups, people with disabilities, and the marginalized. They want real change through solidarity between workers, farmers, LGBTQ+, and many other marginalized people, economic justice, social equality, and future worth believing in. So that is why the KPTU pays attention to the voice of the square that resounded during the struggle for the impeachment and removal of Yoon Suk-yeol. That is why the KPTU calls for a great social reform, not just a change of appearance to make it look good, but a fundamental reorientation of economic, labor, and public service policies that will open a new road to a new world after impeachment. We believe in taxing the rich and powerful to pay for universal quality public services and to reduce inequality. We believe in debt relief or forgiveness to ease the burden on households and the young generation drowning in credit to afford unaffordable housing costs. We believe in reducing inequality by strengthening workers' rights and expanding democratic control over the economy. We also believe in creating and implementing a public renewable energy program to achieve a just transition for the people and the energy workers most affected by the climate emergency. This vision cannot be achieved by critical support for the Democratic Party of the status quo. It requires a new political alignment rooted in the working class, based on solidarity and driven by justice. In response to the upcoming presidential election and beyond, 4 major industrial unions in the KCTU, representing nearly half of its membership, including the KPTU, the Healthcare Workers Union, and the Metal Workers Union, and so on, are working with the Labor Party, the Green Party, and the Justice Party, and other social movement groups to build a progressive alliance. An alliance that can give hope not only to workers, but also to the young, the poor, and the marginalized, and make their voices heard loud and clear. Trade unionists and people who support progressive forces and want real working class politics in the alliance have donated small to large sums of money, have chosen their own presidential candidate, and will support the candidate during the presidential campaign to the extent that each of us can. After the presidential election, through legislative and local elections until 2027, we will continue to discuss how to turn this small movement into a large, united, progressive political movement. We will reach out with bold and new policies, as we did when we first formed the DLP in 2000, to our members as well as to voters who have become skeptical of progressive politics out of disappointment and despair following the split of the DLP in 2008. We will also organize struggle to push both major parties and the new government to adopt policies that benefit all people, not just the wealthy. In the second half of this year, the KPTU will lead a campaign for wage increases and greater state accountability by organizing coordinated strikes to confront the coming wave of conservative economic policies. We will press the government to assume its responsibility for the people's life and safety at work and daily life through an expansionary fiscal policy for the people by expanding universal quality public services and labor rights for all, not just profits and growth. We will pressure the government to establish a platform for good faith negotiations with public sector unions on government policies related to trade union rights and public policies. So to our comrades and friends gathered here tonight, and to the labor movement from around the world, we know that the rise of the far right is not limited to one country. From Trump's anti-union, anti-immigrant policies to attacks on democracy and human rights around the world, the challenges we face are interconnected. But so is our fight. Despite all these challenges and setbacks, the Korean labor movement and working class politics have taken a small step forward toward a new beginning. Let's stand together boldly and in solidarity to defend democracy, expand workers' rights, and build a better world. The KPTU stands ready to walk this path with you. And finally, before I close, since my activist background is in the student movement, I want to take a moment to show my support for the students at CUNY SLU who are fighting for basic protocols to keep students safe from ICE and for more democracy on campus. Thank you.
everybody again. Is this working?
Yes.
Yeah. Uh-oh. Okay. Thank you so much, sister. That was incredible. So many lessons and like so many parallels actually as I was listening. So I want to begin by expressing my solidarity with the students. I have to say, so years ago, the Taxi Workers Alliance, we used to have our night driver meetings in this space. Like 1 a.m, this place would be packed. We used to meet from 1 to 4 a.m. And the staff here are so great. They would, Podrick in particular, would stay late. Yeah, he would stay late and keep the doors open for us. It's real solidarity. But today I feel I feel a certain affection for this place. But today I feel so honored to be here, and I feel honored because we get to be among students. And in this political moment in this country, you are the beacon of hope. You are standing up not only against the authoritarianism here, but specifically, you have been fighting a genocide. And I particularly want to salute those of you who are part of the Students for Palestine movement. What happened to my mic? Yeah, loud and proud. I want to particularly salute those of you who are part of the Palestine Solidarity Movement. Yes. And I stand wholeheartedly, as somebody who loves this school, I thank you and let you know that I stand wholeheartedly in your fight against ICE and for real democracy at CUNY at large. And I want to talk about Palestine because, our union, we took a position against the genocide back in January of 2024. We participated in some actions, and when we took our position, by the way, we had a meeting on Zoom, and I think it was like over 500 members that had attended that meeting, and we put out a statement of solidarity. And we're so proud of, particularly unions like the UAW that have been really leading that fight. If you ask me, what is the hope in fighting the authoritarianism of today? In my humble opinion, it is the Palestine Solidarity Movement in this country. Because there's a reason that is the movement that is so centrally under attack at the moment. For the labor movement, talking about issues that are beyond our bread and butter, it's a difficult thing to do. I don't want to paint a rosy picture, and I don't want to talk rhetorically about it. I'm proud of the politics that I hold, but I'm not naive to think that we live in a society where it's easy to be, somebody who is left in any part of our society, including the labor movement itself. I mean, we see at the moment, probably one of the loudest labor leaders that's being promoted by the administration is very passionately and ignorantly, anti-left, and, seems to be very, very proud about it. And it breaks my heart because that was my mom's old union. But, fighting the left and progressivism, red baiting has its long history, right, within the labor movement. And I think, part of the reason that is so problematic is because those are often, historically and in the moment, really the voices that end up being the most pro-working class, the voices that are most willing to challenge capital, challenge the bosses, right, not just capitalism, but capital, challenge the bosses, fight for more democracy within the union as well as within the economy, of your own industry. And so when you have red baiting or, anti-progressivism or, kind of anti-left attacks, they really fundamentally are attacks on, at the core of it, they're attacks on working people, on the working class, because you're really trying to separate the working class from those who have been its best allies and those who are willing to be its soldiers on the front line. And so, when we look at what is happening in our country right now, authoritarianism has an economic base and it has an economic goal. I really felt that one of the shortcomings before the election was, people kept saying, Trump wins, he's going to bring in fascism. But nobody really defined what is fascism. And there was very little kind of movement work to explain the material basis of fascism, right? First they gag you, then they keep you poor. It's kind of simple, right? But we don't talk about it in that way. And so really, so much of it became almost intellectualized. This idea of like fascism is something you read in history books, and it's a concern of the elite because they're the people anyway who have some semblance of democracy. Whereas everybody else is going to have to choose between either democracy or a fighting chance at a good economic life. When really what we needed to be talking about is if the goal to take away your democracy is so that you don't get that fighting chance of a good economic life, right? To really be able to connect how poverty and war, are really central in order for those, our economic policies, and in order for them to be advanced, you need to limit democracy. We don't talk enough about how immigration is an economic policy. The attacks on universities is an economic policy. They don't call it a classroom for no reason, right? And you are, as students, and I know, working class, right? Most of us didn't really get to choose between when you got to be a student and when you became a worker, right? Many of us end up being both. But in the bigger picture, in the bigger scheme of things, today's students are tomorrow's workers, and particularly the workers that are supposed to enter into the halls of power, right, within whether finance or in other kind of like white collar work. And so I think that without a class analysis, without an economic analysis or a critique of capitalism, we cannot understand this moment of authoritarianism. And the most organized base of workers who day to day live out capitalism, debate capitalism, think through capitalism, find ways of fighting economic inequality are working people. And, unions are critical in this fight because it's our job to organize the working people and the working class and to really develop that consciousness around these issues. And so there's no question that whether as we heard from our sister in the case of South Korea, or even when you look at the Arab Spring, or you look at the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa and the role of COSATU, there is a long history that trade unionism, that before social movements could really take hold, trade unions in their corners would keep up the fight against authoritarian regimes, would find ways of winning against authoritarian regimes, and eventually would be part of the inspiration of mass movements. The problem in these United States is we have a labor movement that has become disconnected from a people's movement. We have a labor movement where too many people think that our job is to be the gatekeeper of capital rather than being the champion of the working class. We have a labor movement that in the face of power often thinks we need to curl up like a lapdog rather than lash out like a tiger. And I say this, and I'm happy to concretize it for anybody who has any semblance of doubt, because I say this not to be rhetorical, but really these are lessons that we have experienced. In our industry, there's a company union, meaning a union that Uber handpicked and signed an agreement with, and Uber gives them money. And their basic job is to undermine our organizing. That's and the idea that when that company union sprung up, very few people in the labor movement wanted to criticize it because they said, well, that's their business and that's their right. They're a top 10 union. They get to make their own decisions, as if somehow, whether a union is ranked in the top 10 or not needs to somehow make us forget what is right from wrong. Like, we have our own values, and like the idea that you don't sign a contract with the boss, that you are going to be their face and they give you money, I think that's pretty basic. And you don't need to be a socialist or a communist or anywhere close to the left or even a progressive to actually believe that. That's a pretty non-ideological position when you're a unionist, that you are supposed to work for the workers and not for the bosses. But in our own industry, we have seen that turned upside down. Throughout the gig economy, that's been a strategy of the corporations to really take business unionism one step further into company unionism. And once you misclassify workers as independent contractors, and so they're no longer protected by the NLRB, you can't challenge that as yellow dog unionism, right? And many of the lobbyists that have promoted this, this wave come out of the Democratic Party, right? Depends on the state. Uber and Lyft in 2017 hired more lobbyists than Microsoft, Amazon, and Walmart combined. And, depending on the state, it could be Democrats because if they're the party of influence, or it could be the Republicans. So we've also seen, in 1998, our union went out on strike, and Giuliani was the mayor at the time, and the police commissioner called us taxi terrorists. Giuliani called out, what they back then called INS, right, immigration. We went to, one of the actions was to do a march across the Brooklyn Bridge, and they had tow trucks and, so much police presence surrounding that entire scene. There's a way in which we criminalize resistance, activism in general, right? Particularly by the working class. There's nothing new about that. And a way in which we use police force to particularly repress, worker organizing. For us, what we saw was a very racialized attack. calling us terrorists, right? This is a workforce that is predominantly people of color. Today, there are over 178,000 drivers, my brothers and sisters, that work these streets every day, serving over 1 million people every single day. 92% of them were born outside of this country. And so, you know, and we are one of the largest Muslim and Sikh workforces in the city. And so when they picked the term terrorist, they knew exactly what, you know, they knew the dog whistle that they were blowing, right? They knew exactly the message they wanted to convey. And you know, and again, and then they threatened to call out immigration on us. Few years ago in 2021, we did an occupation of City Hall in our debt forgiveness fight. It was for 45 days. Many of our members, they slept in their cabs outside on Broadway. It culminated in a 15-day hunger strike. And we won. Yeah. But, you know, we keep asking ourselves today, could we today do that kind of an occupation? You know, last year, less than a year ago, we were having marches of over 3,000 Uber and Lyft drivers where we were marching on City Hall to Uber's headquarters. They were the largest Uber and Lyft driver marches anywhere in this country. And today, before we plan an action like that, we have to think to ourselves, are we going to have enough legal observers in case Homeland Security comes out there, right? All they need to do is create scenes to just scare people. Even if they're not going to go through with the threats, even if they end up being stopped, right, by legal forces, but they just need to do enough to really scare people and to, you know, to repress that activism. And so really, brothers and sisters, when your very right to organizing is under attack, when organizing itself becomes a dangerous act, you know, that has made you more vulnerable, there really is only one answer. And that answer is to organize. In numbers, there is power. We used to put this in our flyers when we first started organizing in the mid-90s, and Giuliani would constantly threaten to arrest people. We would say, okay, well, if you don't want to get arrested, then we need more people than police out there. That's the only answer. You know, if you don't want to get shut down, then you need to lock arms and make it physically impossible for them to remove you. You know, if they're going to make an example out of one of us, we need to band together so they know that the rest of us are going to demand an answer. And, you know, workers live this out every day, right? I have really seen this, you know. Maybe drivers as immigrants may be reluctant to join certain neighborhood actions, but when their job is under attack, when they know that, you know, that their wages are being stolen or that they're being locked into poverty, people find the courage that they need to really fight back. Because they understand there's no way out. You know, you go to work every day not to stay poor. You're trying to get the hell out of that poverty. And you also understand, I think, more than the necessity, you understand your power. You know that, yeah, you need that job, but guess what? That job needs you. And you understand that. And so workers, you know, have a consciousness about their power that really gets developed through the course of your labor. You know, you hold it in your very hands through the work that you are doing. the job of a labor movement, the job of a workers' rights movement, and the job of a progressive movement and a left and social movements that love workers, that love working people, that believe in justice, that despise war and genocide and inequality and racism and patriarchy. Our job is to stand in solidarity of workers who have that courage and have the vision to be willing to fight that system. Because, you know, at the end of the day, there truly is no more of a powerful force in our society than organized working people. You know, when I think about the current moment that we are in, the thought that keeps coming back to me over and over and over again is, I think that we as unionists, the task that we have is to find a way to get all of organized labor to call for a mass action. And I know people talk about general strikes. Yes, I know people talk about general strikes, and, you know, strikes they are a process. You know, it takes real organizing work to get to a strike. They are the best thing in the world, but they take a lot of damn work. You know, I always say to all our organizers, you might forget your kids' names one day, but you'll never forget the date of the strike. And this is true. But, you know, but as part of that, but if we're ever really are going to get to a general strike, you got to have a roadmap. You need an escalation plan, right? We're not just going to go from here to there. There's got to be a roadmap. And I think, you know, why doesn't the labor movement have more, mass actions, like masses, like millions of people marching in D.C., you know, bring down the buses from everywhere, you know, and really show this is not civil society America, which they fear less because they think people don't vote and because we have a two-party system that Wall Street finances, right? But these are workers. It doesn't matter if we vote or not. We can bend your society. And so we as a labor movement, we need to show that we need to flex our muscle. We need to show that we have that capacity to organize. And through our organizing, we can truly, inspire and organize the rest of the society along with us. If it doesn't happen, I think it goes back to the ideological divisions. You know, it goes back to the fact that we have people that are willing to think that their role is to be a gatekeeper. It's to make deals from the top to the bottom, that you don't need to organize because you'll find that businessman who's willing to shake your hand, right? You may spit at your shoes in the process, but somehow what you care about is that he may be willing to shake your hand. You know, that's not the way to build a people's movement. That's not the way to build a movement that is capable of truly building a better world. And people deserve a better world. People deserve a better world. I tell you, I'm 52. I started organizing drivers when I was 23. And, I am so fucking sick of poverty. Can I tell you? I'm so sick of poverty. I'm so sick of war. I think since October 2023, I can barely smile. I barely feel joy. I feel like an imposter. It was like almost every day I wanted to cancel my talk here, because every day I think to myself, but we're not doing enough to stop a fucking genocide. Like, what do any of us, it feels like, it feels like, it feels so, it doesn't feel overwhelming, to be honest. It feels really simple, like right and wrong. But it feels, really depressing at times, in terms of what is happening with the level of war and death. When I think about the poverty across this country, we don't talk enough about the poverty in America. It's like globalization, neoliberalism, austerity. We think these are all things that happen somewhere else. And we don't talk about how much of it is part of like the American fabric, I mean, you look around and you see how much people struggle. I look at my members who I love so much, like more than life itself. And there are days where I just can't believe how hard they have to work. Like it makes me sick, honest to God. That they have to work 60 to 70 hours just to put food on the table, and how many of them during COVID and since and even before will talk about, the sacrifices in terms of like the amount of groceries they have to cut back on because we had a massive inflation, historic inflation in 2022, 2 years after a pandemic. And they're literally having to choose between gasoline and groceries. And you hear about people that say, well, don't talk about inflation because there's going to be an election and that can make the Democrats look bad because they're the ones in power right now. And all I could think to myself is, like, I don't give a fuck, because people are struggling and they're suffering and they deserve a better life. Life is beautiful. It's such a gift. Like we're so fortunate to be alive, and people deserve to like not feel hunger and not have to tell their children that they can't afford something, not have to tell their children, I have to work. I can't spend that extra time with you. Or to say to themselves, I can't make that doctor's appointment today because if I don't go to work, I could get fired. My brother's a retail worker, and we're always comparing stories. The number of stories of like people on dialysis, chemotherapy, people who are caretakers. We don't value our caretakers enough. People who take care of family members or friends who need them, because we have a rotten system, healthcare system, that under capitalism doesn't value you when you're no longer considered productive, right? And so people are just kind of cast out and they're displaced. And how many workers, live in that constant fear? Workers, people who build the wealth in this society. Workers, the people without whom this society cannot function. Workers, the people whose labor, whose blood and sweat is the only reason that we have the highest number of billionaires in the history of the world. That we live in a society with paved streets and with some level of functional systems. People deserve better. And we as unionists, we must do better. We as unionists must recognize that we are the people that hold the power to truly win something better. And so, in closing, I want to again say to all of you, those of you in particular who are students, I feel so honored to be among you today. When I watch your protests, when I see you marching and I see your actions of courage, I just want you to know that you are inspiring so many people. You're giving courage and you're giving hope to so many people. You are the reason that I still believe that in these United States of today, that we can build a better world. I know that it starts with your movement, and we as unionists, our job is to support you, is to give you the resources. You know, all the tents and the materials that we used in our occupation of City Hall. We're so proud that the students used it when they occupied the new school. But please don't stop. Please don't stop. And those of you who are union members, keep fighting for union democracy. You know, I mean, I will say to you the same thing that I say to the drivers. You know, unions don't build the working class. The working class built the union. So understand as a unionist who you serve. You serve the class. Serve working people, whether they're in your union or not. Fight for your unions to be movement unions, to be class-conscious unions, not business unions. That is the only way forward, and that is the only way that we can fight the authoritarianism of today, which we will survive. Human beings will survive it. We will find ways to survive. We will organize, and the system will crack in that process, and we will eventually win. But what we win, the world that we win, depends on the type of fight that we wage. And so, you know, wage fights that at the heart are humanistic. I mean, when we talk about things like, you know, racism and inclusion, what are we talking about? We're talking about humanism. We're saying care for people. You know, care for the value of human life and believe that every person has the right to a dignified life. That's what it means to fight for justice. That's what it means to fight for a world, you know, that is not oppressive and oppressed. And so, brothers and sisters, with that, I say thank you so much for allowing us this time. Thank you to all of you on behalf of the Taxi Workers Alliance for all the support and solidarity that you have given to our movement. We see you, we feel you, we feel the power of your solidarity. And in 2017, we showed Donald Trump exactly who we were when we went out on strike at Kennedy Airport in support of the immigrant rights activists that had occupied Kennedy. We did that because we knew if we went out on strike at the taxi lot, they were going to send the cops on us, and we knew how to deal with that, instead of sending the cops on our brothers and sisters from the communities that had occupied Terminal 4 on that day. And so we have flexed our muscle before. We will do it again. But I know that in this political moment, none of us can stand alone. We truly need each other. And I believe that with each other, we can win. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. We'd like to keep the conversation in the room going, and we will give the last word to Robin Kelly and play his recording at the very end. If the recording doesn't work, then we'll take a few more questions. Okay, so that's our current plan. So so please, if you have questions written, they'll be collected. I'll kick things off by noting that both of you in different ways speak to the absolute necessity for mass action to occur. I am struck that in South Korea, the formation of your union came out of a mass strike where 50% of union members struck. And it's following on the heels of that, that your union was formed. And you spoke about how important it was in this particular moment for there to be mass action, while also referencing the strikes and mass actions that the Taxi Workers Alliance has engaged in. Currently, in both South Korea and here, that's not where the numbers are today, right? Our numbers are much lower. We're not as unified. They're splintering and shifts. And so my question to you both is, what are we not doing that we need to do that will get us towards a mass action state of affairs, to open the road, right? What needs to occur on a systematic level within unions, between unions, and other social movements to get us to mass action?
Well, I mean, I think we need a broad coalition, right? I mean, when you're talking about something like authoritarianism, and a real serious threat, right, to very fundamental democracy in this country, you have to have a broad movement. It's not, we're not talking about one specific issue or, something that might be seen as particularly ideological. I mean, I think this is an issue that can really appeal to very broad sections of our society, because basically everybody who's not a fascist, which I still think is, quite a broad sector of our society. And so I think having, engaging organized labor, but also, churches and, neighborhood organizations, immigrant rights movement. I think all of the movements across our society. And I think we cannot get into sectarianism and really debating what are all kind of the specific demands, of this movement. I think that it has to be broad. It has to fundamentally be a focus about, the importance of, constitutional law, the importance of not disappearing people, of mass deportations, against policing and repression of our movements. And so I think that means that finding ways of cutting across party lines, cutting across ideological lines, and I think really having a top-down to also, and floor, bottom-up movement to engage those in the union movement in the leadership. And the reason I said earlier that the Palestine Solidarity Movement really gives me a lot of hope is because that is a movement that exists against tremendous odds and, repression and opposition. And yet there are hundreds and hundreds of locals that have taken resolutions, that have been having internal debates. And so I think that there's something really magical in that coalition work, and we need to really take those strategies, to build out a broader movement against really the constitutional crisis in our country at the moment.
That's very tough question. We haven't found an answer for your question, but we live in a very competitive society in South Korea. During the public education, students have to study more than, 15 hours to get into good college, to get a good job, and, to get a decent wages. And also, we are in the society where 3 generations who have very different, who have lived very different economic situation. Like my parents' generation, they were from a poor country when South Korea experienced the Korean War, and then my generation became living in like developing country, like in between developing country and developed country, and then my children generation, they live in developed country. So these three generations have very different view on social problems and politics. So it also affects to the trade union movement, because many of the leadership are from in their 50s, and in the trade unions we've been seeing generational change, because in particular we organize public sector workers, public institutions workers, and in South Korea when you work for the public institutions you need to pass this special examination, and they feel like they are privileged, and they are very well paid, and they never learned about solidarity with others, not necessarily with the vulnerable. They're just in the very competitive their life has been all under the heavy pressure and competition. So for trade union, like for KPTU, we've been trying to develop education program for different generations, because younger members in their 20s and 30s, they don't have experience with solidarity or social movement. But then old generation, they think they know everything, and they don't value voices from youth members. So what we are trying to give like space for young members. So we try to organize youth member structure in the governance of trade union. But the thing is, they're very they are very quiet when there's activity organized by the trade union. But they talk a lot on online platforms. So it's very challenging for us, because we are in this transitional moment in the trade union movement. But then we experienced this broad solidarity when we fought against the former President Yoon's coup attempt. So we organized like meeting with young people during the impeachment rallies and struggles in February, and from having conversation and meeting with these young generation, we learned a lot from them. So we haven't implemented any measures yet, but then we are starting discussing how we can change the culture in the trade union movement, how we can make trade union movement to be attractive to young generation. So we are trying to focus on educational program. And also because of the labor law revisions for the last 15 years, we used to be much more militant trade union in South Korea. But then because of the law, political strikes banned from 2010 or 2012. So also, existing members, they're also very afraid of organizing, political strikes. So the last time when we organized political strike was like 2016 or 2015, when the government tried to privatize national railway system. That was the last time that we organized a political strike. So we also working very hard to revise those, labor law that restrict right to strike. And so in terms of we've been working, to develop education program, and at the same time, we've been working to revise legislation that allows more space for trade unions and trade union members to be engaged in political activities.
So the Palestine movement here, this iteration, was rooted in college campuses. When we look at the anti-apartheid movement, a pivotal component of that was the boycotting of South Africa anchored on college campuses and pushing for divestment. A question we have from the audience is, what role does democracy on college campuses play in the larger fight against authoritarianism? And what responsibilities do university leaders have? Well, it could be tied to Palestine or in general. There are those who say that no social movement can succeed unless it involves, or political movement can succeed without involving the youth. So on this question of what role does democracy and college campuses play in the larger fight against authoritarianism, and what's the responsibility of university leaders in this fight?
I don't know. So when I recalled my college years back then, it was very natural to stand in solidarity with workers and farmers and everyone he victimized because of the government policy or whatsoever. And back then, university used to be a place for democracy, like place for. It's like the university gave students to discuss about different social issues back then. But then after the IMF came to South Korea because of the Asian financial crisis in the late 1990s, the culture changed a lot because labor flexibility, and lots of job cuts and reduction of decent jobs in the public sector. This situation created that university students they were not be able to pay attention to social issues surrounding them because they have to make a living and they have to win the competition to make a living for themselves. So for over 2 decades, university became like a job training institute or something like that. So through the past 5 months struggle against Yoon's coup, we've seen some hope because we've seen lots of student association from different university. They kind of realized that democracy can be took away, because when they were born, they were already in the democratic society. So they didn't have to fight for democracy or they didn't have to fight for their rights. And then, because of the Yoon's stupid coup and, young generation, they started learning, okay, we need to do something to defend our democracy and we need to something to address, different kinds of social issues because those issues also are affecting to their lives. So, that's what we learned from recent struggle during the, Yoon's impeachment and yeah.
I mean, there's a reason why, look at who's been in the front line of attacks from this administration. It's been universities, it's been law firms, right? But I mean, you look at, under Pinochet, who are they attack first, right? it was universities, teachers, students, right? There's a real connection there. I mean, in order for fascism to succeed, it needs to dismantle educational systems, places where you can have more debate, but also the places that produce those that are going to go into the economy in the coming years. And so the fact that universities are on the front line, I think should say to university leaders that they do need to step up, that they do need to defend democracy, that the more universities that fall, the harder it will be for the rest of society to really defend itself. And so whether we're talking about stopping raids by ICE, or entering into these terrible anti-intellectual agreements, right, that some of the universities have been making with the administration. I mean, particularly like a place like CUNY, which is a home of the working class, I think more, and other public universities have a really important role to play. They need to be part of that fight back. And I think the, university leaders, again, this is not ideological. Like, I don't think this is really about, you don't necessarily need to be left or progressive. You just need to be anti-fascist, in order to really, I think, hold that line. And there is a very specific role to play, and I think a place like CUNY in particular has a role to play, given it is the home of the working class.
We are coming into the closing section, so we will try and see if we can get audio on Robin's remarks. And we're still not hearing anything.
First, apologies, I can't be there with you in person.
Thank you.
Wait. We gotta time it, so. Count it down, Aaron. 3.
First, apologies, I can't be there with you in person. I was looking forward to being back in New York City, sharing the podium with Bhairavi Desai and Sung-Hee Yeol, really incredible labor organizers. I have a little bit of time, so I just want to make a few points. One, what we're calling a crisis of democracy is really just an escalation of class war. Most of the policies coming out of the White House are aimed at working people, whether it's destroying what's left of the social safety net, undercutting workers' bargaining rights, affordable health care, withdrawing regulations on pollution, fossil fuel extraction. We've witnessed the swift mass firing of federal workers, a relentless effort to dismantle the NLRB, not to mention the Labor Department. If you look at the proposed budget cuts, it's, the cuts to Medicaid, to the SNAP program, to HUD, especially Section 8 rental vouchers. I mean, it can go on and on. Of course, the tip of the spear, as it were, the prime attack on the working class are these mass deportations. It is the most direct attack on the working class by the state. Look at the proposed budget. They're talking about increasing Homeland Security by $65 billion, really about this deportation regime, along with an over $1 trillion budget for defense. So much for the devolution of the state. Second, I don't need to tell you all that the class war and the crisis facing labor right now is global, it's international. Nearly 3/4 of the globe live under some form of authoritarian rule, and this shift emerged in response to capital's latest crises. And by that, I don't mean just the 2008 meltdown, but the mass global resistance movement that emerged in the wake of capital's crisis in Athens, Madrid, New York, Sao Paulo, Seoul, Santiago, and so forth. We cannot defeat the rising tide of fascism without being internationalists. And we cannot claim to be internationalists if we don't resist genocide. Genocide is a labor issue. We cannot continually support, fund, arm, defend, shield, apologize for Israel's genocidal war on Palestine. Palestine represents the last major colonial outpost where people not only experienced 77 years of violent dispossession, but where each and every day our comrades in Palestine are being wiped out with funding from US taxpayers, funding that's designed to enrich weapons manufacturers. So it's not enough to stop this current war. Anti-colonialism is also a working class issue. So we need to end the occupation. 3, many US liberals issued dire warnings that the Trump second term spelled the end of democracy. And they looked to Viktor Orban's Hungary as the future if we're not careful. Some have pointed to the Philippines. Though for me, Javier Milei's Argentina is the model that the Trump regime is following in Project 2025. But these comparisons, for me at least, are not the point. The problem with the claim that, the second Trump administration spells the end of democracy is that liberal democracies are perfectly capable of devising and implementing racist, xenophobic, neo-fascist policies without dismantling democracy. And the fact is, the most sophisticated, highly functioning Western democracies not only generate and maintain inequality, but they are themselves ethno-national states, imperial powers, whose roots go back to like slavery, colonialism, and currently, the marginalization of minority populations. So how can it get away with this and still secure democratic majorities? Well, the answer is racist nationalism, right-wing nationalism. The segment of the working class most vulnerable to right-wing or neo-fascist capture represent the dominant racial, ethnic, religious, national groupings, no matter what the country. Appeals to race, nationalism, citizenship, masculinity, heteronormativity have always been deployed to weaken other kinds of solidarities, class solidarities. Politicians, right-wing forces, even the media are often complicit in blaming working class misery on immigrants, women, non-white people, indigenous people, queer and trans people, any social group upon which social anxieties can be displaced. But the objects or targets of social anxieties are often people who've been living in a permanent state of crisis, in ghettos and barrios, under police terror, unemployed, underemployed, houseless, displaced by perpetual war, deported, detained. And their relationship to democracy has always been, or often I should say, been marginal, to say the least. The obvious examples are undocumented, informally incarcerated people, but also populations who, for various reasons, have been stripped of representative government. And the example that comes to mind are Black communities in Michigan that were placed under emergency financial managers, these appointed by the governor, whose role was to, quote unquote, temporarily replace city councils, school boards, mayors. And when this is happening, there's little talk of a crisis of democracy. As many of you know, these emergency financial managers had the power to fire elected officials, to abrogate labor contracts with municipal workers, sell off public assets, impose new taxes on residents, and all without a single vote from anybody. And for about 10 years, or at least 10 years ago, I should say, 49% of the state's Black population lived in jurisdictions under emergency financial managers. So we should always consider this when we think about, the auto industry, the UAW, as a catalyst for a resurgent, if not insurgent, labor movement. Lastly, the attack on DEIA is an attack on anti-racism. It's an attack on anti-sexism. It's an attack on disability justice. And therefore, it's actually an attack on the class. It should be obvious to anyone that eliminating DEIA, and I'm not trying to save it, but understand what I'm saying here, is justification for dismantling what's left of the regulatory state. Any agency allegedly practicing so-called DEIA is subject to cuts or outright elimination. And here I take issues with, all the so-called Marxists who are celebrating Trump's repeal of these policies as if corporate diversity programs were the major obstacle to class struggle. So what is to be done? We need a strong, unified, multiracial left. And that means, in the US at least, liberating a segment of the white working class from identity politics to bring them into the class struggle. We need the kind of class-oriented political education that can challenge the dominant ideology, or what Du Bois calls the American assumption, that wealth comes from hard work and the source of misery is not capital or capitalist exploitation, but other workers, foreign workers. Defeating fascism, the fascism we now face, requires something deeper than replacing the current administration or winning elections. We need to know what we're fighting for and build deeper international solidarity. And that means seeing and treating every racist and sexist, xenophobic, homophobic, and transphobic act, every brutal act of state violence, every deportation as an attack on the class, on the whole class. It means thinking beyond nation, standing up for struggling workers around the world, from Palestine to Sudan, the Congo to Haiti, China to Mexico. It means fighting for the social wage, not just higher pay and better working conditions, but a true, genuine reinvestment in public institutions like hospitals, housing, education, libraries, accessible green spaces. And it means, fundamentally, all this means worker power and worker democracy.
Thank you all for being with us tonight and for the entire day for many of you. We will hopefully see you tomorrow. Take good care. Thank you both. Thank you.